Hey, how's it going? Here's what I've got for you today. All right, when we think about the salvation plan that God allegedly had, we think about Jesus' death on the cross and how that was payment for our sins and that whole thing. The idea of that a God, a divine creator who could create the universe would need to resort to some type of filthy human sacrifice in the first century in Palestine, to me, just seems to be a little telling, especially when you think about the fact that human sacrifice, there's stuff that predates the time of Jesus, the alleged, crucifixion and all that. There's stuff that predates the first century, that includes things like human sacrifice to atone for the appeasing of the gods, right? So these were concepts that existed. So again, here you have an example where the death of Jesus on the cross, his crucifixion, his human sacrifice was not original. It was not like this, we'd never heard of this before. We've heard of it in other instances. So I think that's a little concerning. Why would that be? If truly this was all part of God's plan and it's all true and we're supposed to believe that this story is original, then why is there stuff that predates? Why are there concepts that predate, Jesus' sacrifice on the cross? If in fact this is of God and divine. And the other kind of idea, I never thought of this before because, I never thought about when I was in Christianity because I wasn't aware, wasn't informed. My knowledge base hadn't increased, about things like, I guess they kind of knew that, they would sacrifice people in volcanoes and there were other humans, they would human sacrifice for other gods. I guess I kind of knew a little bit about that. But when you think about it in this context, it kind of makes you go scratch your head and go, maybe this whole, Christianity thing isn't all original. And I'm sad to say that I don't believe that it is. Now, one of the other concerns that I have is if, in fact, let's say that the biblical story is true, and let's assume that the New Testament story and all that, and this is all not just made up stuff, okay? Just the concept of a human sacrifice to atone for sins. I already covered why it would predate the first century, right? Those stories and things that would predate the first century, so that's not original. But also, if it was true, why would a divine creator, someone that could, create the universe, this supernatural being who is obviously can create the majesty of the universe, why would he need to resort to using such primitive methods as he came and dwelt among us as flesh, and he became a man and he died and gave up his life? And now some Christians might say, oh well, because there's blood there's life in the blood, and the blood is cleansing and all these other things. But those were all concepts that existed in Judaism and most likely existed in Zoroastrianism, and they were concepts that predate Christianity. So this idea of a human sacrifice, again, back to what I was saying before, predates the first century. But now back to this concept, what I'm trying to tell you now is, why would a God need to be using those kind of methods? That seems a bit unsophisticated, doesn't it? Like that he would need to use human sacrifice as a means to atone for sins of the world, of all the people who've lived for all times. When you think about it in this way, it really, to me, begins to become more and more clearer to me, at least in my mind, maybe in your mind as well, that we're not dealing with something that's really a historical event. We're not dealing with something that's actually true, that's of a supernatural origin, and that most likely this is just more made up stuff that we have, especially when it has in common with it. It would be different if the Christian story, the whole salvation story, the whole resurrection, the crucifixion, the cross, of all that, and the reasons behind why Jesus needed to die, if that was not found anywhere else and didn't predate it, then I'd say, oh well, yeah, this is very original. So I'd say this is of God, so to speak, right? But I don't think that's what we're dealing with here. I think when you look at it in this way, you can see that a sophisticated God would have used other means in which to save his creation. you know, I know some people will say, well, you know, maybe God shouldn't have created us with a sin nature. Well, we weren't created with a sin nature, as we're told in Christianity. This is something that happened in the Garden of Eden, and the original sin was created because of the fall of man, because of, you know, Adam and Eve. They sinned in the garden, and then thus now brought sin and death into the world. That's all assertions by the Jewish story that happens in the book of Genesis. You know, it's not even a Christian story, but of course, you know, Christians want to say, oh, well, you know, we came after the Jews, but we know more than the Jews. And it's like, I think how disrespectful that is, because here you have a religion that was in place long before your ass came along, and now you're going to sit here and say that, you know more than another religion that came before you, another group of people. You know, they have a longer history than Christianity does. I can't remember exactly how long the Israel and Judea and how long that period of time was, but I think it was more than 2,000 years. So anyways, my point is just this, that using a filthy human sacrifice, using a human sacrifice to atone for sins, and that not a new concept to Christianity, I'm sorry to say. So if it's not a new concept, then it's probably like, okay, this is copycat. We're just borrowing things that existed predate Christianity, and we're borrowing it. And that my other assertion, as I stated before, is just that a supernatural being would have more sophisticated, would have higher ways of providing for salvation and forgiveness of sins without having to use such primitive methods as human sacrifice. Thanks for watching the video. Take care.